having Andy and folks from Center Grove with us. And I look very forward to that. I just dropped the clicker. See if this is working. It's working. We're good. In Mark 5, you're going to find Jesus incredibly busy. As Mark's gospel kind of shows Jesus, it is one event right after another. And when I thought of this particular moment with Jesus in Mark 5, there's several things going on. We're going to focus really on verses 25 to verse 34. But I want to look first at the introductory thoughts kind of going into 21. When Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. A great multitude. At this time, according to Mark's encounter, it's noised abroad. The words got out. There's a man that can heal disease. If, and it's just if that were to happen today, now I know some of you are going to say, but there are some that claim, and I'm not talking about the claims that we hear and charlatans that claim healing, and I know I sound judgmental, okay, because I've never seen a miracle like the Bible describes a miracle. All of you sitting in this audience, I know I've seen God work providentially through prayer. That's different than what I've witnessed as I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the book of Acts. The instantaneous healing, visible, God changing the situation immediately, that is dire and deadly and very difficult to one that is not. Now, we can have that discussion later if you need to have that. As far as I'm not saying God doesn't still work today. He still does. But in the way I see in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I don't see anybody walking up to a gravesite and bringing somebody back from the dead. I don't see anybody walking to someone who's never seen before, and immediately they get their sight back. What I have seen is individuals with disorders and difficulties, and I'm saying a biblical miracle. Now, maybe you have. We'll talk about that. You can share your story with me. But a biblical miracle like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John talk about. But if someone could do today what Jesus did, how busy do you think they would be? Wherever they're located, and especially today with the advance of transportation of individuals being able to come to that person. Now here, just imagine, even in Jesus' day, they were coming from everywhere to be with him, to come into his presence. It says, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. Behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, my little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed, and she will live. So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him, Mark says. And that's what kind of presents this next situation. You see, because Mark 5 is brimming with impossible cases. Earlier part of Mark 5, which we haven't even looked at, there's a demonic man, demon-possessed, wild man. Everybody knows the guy in the graveyard. You got to know. I don't know what his name was, but I guarantee you everybody in the area knew the guy in the graveyard because he was crazy. Cut himself. Screaming, yelling. Impossible situation. Nobody had been able to deal with him. Nobody had been able to do anything with him. That's a whole other incredible story along with this situation. And then as he comes to the seaside, an individual comes to him and says, my daughter is at the point of death. I can in one sense. When your child is at the point of death, it's just weird for me to know that I can actually say that. When we got the call, a flew into Memphis. The infection that ravaged Caleb's body. I'd have done anything within my power. I'd have called whoever, one of the most foremost infectious disease doctor was there at the hospital in Memphis. They were doing everything they could do. Every conceivable thing, throwing every antibiotic they had and what was going on in his bloodstream. You got the diseased woman, and we're going to talk about her in detail. And then ultimately, in the end of Matthew 5, it's not just near the point of death. We've got a dead girl on our hands. Because Jesus is interrupted in the journey to get to the house. So when you look at this day in the life of Jesus, this afternoon, all of these events, what I hope to accomplish as we look at this is I want you to see Jesus in a way that probably many of you already see him, but it's something I want you to see not just from a physiological standpoint of what Jesus is capable of, because there's a great similarity. If Jesus is capable of what you're about to see him do, which is all three of these incurable situations he's going to deal with. And he's going to change the lives of the individuals that have these incurable situations forever. We don't have a follow-up story of the Gadarene demoniac as he's known. But he's last seen, coming into this moment, sitting at a table in his right mind, clothed and normal again. You see, Jesus is more than able. Mark's gospel is all about what Jesus is able to do, and he's able to do it instantaneously. He does it by saying what needs to be said. That's part of this in Mark's account that you don't. When you go back and you look in verse 8 real quick, when you're looking back at the demon-possessed man, he said to him, and he's talking to the demon that's in the man, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." Then he asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion, for we are many." And also he begged him earnestly that he would not send him out. The demon knew who he was dealing with. And in this whole moment, he's going, "Don't tell us. I know you're going to send us off. I know you're going to deliver. I know you're going to tell us to come out, and we don't have any choice." See, that's the thing. When Jesus said to a demon, "Come out," it wasn't like, "Well, we're not going to. We're staying where we are." They did not have that choice. That's the kind of power, that's the kind of authority Jesus had. I've always wondered, I don't know. But to me, you can't look at the story of the Gadarene demoniac and not have a little smile on your face. What he does to a whole herd of pigs, poor pigs. I don't know if there's some... I would love to have heard the first time this story was shared in a Jewish audience going, "We don't have to worry about them anymore." No more temptation there. The whole herd just ran off into the sea and killed themselves. I don't know. It's just that the demon would drive a bunch of pigs crazy enough to kill themselves. What they'd done to the poor man over all those years. We don't know the time. But I do know this. They begged him that he wouldn't send them out of the country. He doesn't. "Okay, I'll send you into the pigs and you'll just be destroyed." I don't know if there was some, if the individual in whom the demons are die, the demons are dead. I don't know. We don't have all that kind of detail. But whatever happens, Jesus deals with it and takes care of it. There are no incurable situations with him. You ever thought about that when you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? There's nothing in the universe that doesn't listen to him. The wind, waves, the storms. Quiet down, peace be still, he says. None of us. That should boggle our minds. To a fig tree, you're not growing anymore. Stopped. To the whole host of other things that we know that, as he said, the power of what Jesus spoke and what would happen as a result of that. He is the power of God in his word. And the word was made flesh and dwelt among us. There's several things that happen. In verse 25, we'll move on now. A certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years. New King James doesn't do that, render that. You think, well, blood flowing's good. No. New International, I believe, uses hemorrhage. Here's an individual, and we've known of individuals even in our lifetime. I know I've known of individuals that go to the doctor and said, you're losing blood, and we don't know where it's going. And test after test, the horror that she endured, her symptoms were she was hemorrhaging, and they couldn't figure out how or why. Now, our first thought is, well, medicine, first century, not that. But I mean, they had some abilities as physicians of figuring things out like that. But the testing, of course, they didn't have the testing we have today. I'm sure there's some obvious ways they could kind of start figuring out, and there have been a lot of surmisal as to exactly how she was bleeding, if there was any obvious indication of it, or just she was just, pale and fatigued and just losing blood, and it could be several different things that are going on there, but it's been going on for 12 years. Have you ever known anybody with a chronic health condition? That's been to physician after physician after physician, and there's no answer. I've had a minor when I went back, several years ago, when I was having the headaches. How frustrating that was for me. I'm not the most patient individual. I'm a little better now than I used to be. But I can remember going through those tests. And I remember entering them, when Dr. Mitchell and they started running and, did the scans and the x-rays and the MRIs. And then they introduced me to if they ever ask you if you want to have a myelogram, just do your head like this. Remember that test very vividly. As they told me, as they walked me through the procedure at Duke University Hospital, we're going to inject radioactive dye into your spinal fluid. Oh boy. And then we're going to strap you to a table and turn you upside down. Because they were trying to figure out why I'm losing spinal fluid. Found out there was a tear in the dural sac in the lower part of my... And at that moment, I remember just the knowledge of what was happening. I went through all sorts of... I can remember, and Pam remembers this too, because there was somewhat of a simultaneous, or it was around the anniversary of Dad's discovery of his brain tumor. And I just thought all along, I just got a tumor, and they're just not finding it. That's why I'm having the headaches. It just won't go away. To discover that it wasn't a tumor back then was an amazing. But I've known of so many individuals, and you have too, that have gone to doctor after doctor after doctor, that they've had test after test, and the same result comes, you're fine. And the individuals say, no, I'm not. Something's wrong. Now, they knew she was bleeding, they knew she was hemorrhaging, but they could not find the reason or the cure. The horror also is what she suffered. When you look at verse 26, and had suffered many things from many physicians, she had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. Now, I'm going to make some assumptions here other than just the physical suffering. There's no doubt you're losing blood, the fatigue factor, the just feeling horrible all the time, never any energy, just all the combinations of that. And you talk about that, the social suffering most likely of her. Here's a sick person, always sick. Now, the text doesn't talk about it, and people many times will rally past that, even if a friend has. But when a person is chronically sick, it's more difficult to be around that person, to be with that person, because there's several factors that get involved. There's nothing you can do. You try maybe exhaust every effort you had, or maybe friends that exhausted had tried to help her out in every way possible. Nothing's being found. No answer for this. And usually individuals with chronic illnesses, that's their focus. That's what they talk about. And when you're with that person and in that person's presence a great deal, that's their discussion, and you feel overwhelmed by that, and there's nothing you can do to fix it, and it compounds relationships emotionally. You just don't feel good. You feel bad all the time. One of the things that impressed me most about Chester, I know several of you don't know him and you just want, but one of the impressive things to me about Chester is, I don't know, Chester had diabetes. He did have some heart issues. They're not convinced fully exactly what caused he either had a heart attack or stroke, and they're not sure which one that he had at the age of 49. But I know most of the time, just because he was never in great health, but you'd never know it with him. Always smiling, always encouraging other individuals, always upbeat, and even in those moments when you could maybe tell, because I'm not really sure why. I don't know if it was his feet or some of the diabetic condition, but the last several years he had to use a cane to walk with at the age of 49. But you couldn't tell with him, being around him. He never talked about how bad he felt. He never talked about the difficulties that he had. He'd mention it occasionally if he'd been seeing a doctor or whatever, but it wasn't something that he dwelt on. But 12, I'm trying to think of feeling horrible for 12 years. What kind of emotional stress would that put on an individual? Financially. You don't have to be sick long. Especially in our world today, to be in a dire strait in a hurry. And it said that she had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. And I know the Bible's in verses, but in verse 27, we'll get there in a minute. The horror she endured was most especially just the sorrow of this whole situation, of having to deal on a regular basis. I don't have any money. I can't go see anybody else. Nobody has any kind of an answer. Verse 27 says this: there was hope. Why? Look at the very first part of verse 27. Then she heard about Jesus. What had she heard? We're not given a great deal of detail other than that she heard that he was healing the individuals. Now the rest of this story is a little unique in all the other episodes of Jesus' healing. In fact, it's one that has intrigued me for years. In most every case, there is a need, there is an acknowledgement of that need, and then it's addressed by Jesus. Whether he touches or says something is the way that this one is kind of in the reverse. This is someone who's trying to get to Jesus. Remember I said the crowds, they're thronging him. He can't. I would imagine it was near impossible for him to even move. I'm just glad there's never an indication that Jesus is claustrophobic. Because there are people all around him up and but you just get this vision of people reaching out to him and calling out to him and pleading with him, and just host of people coming to him. You know, I've got this disorder, I've got this disorder. Here's what problem I'm dealing with. Jesus, do something. Because she knew. Verse 27. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if only I can touch his clothes, I will be made well. Let me kind of remind you of something. There is no episode prior to this that happening. I don't know, I may be making some assumptions here. I don't know how much detail she had about other healing episodes other than healing, that Jesus is healing people. But to be so convinced that the power of this individual is so that it has permeated his very clothes. Anything touching Jesus is a part of Jesus. And if I can just reach out and touch, I think the King James actually even says just the hem of his garment, I'll be made well. When you think of the determination that she had, just in that whole thought process of it, that's all I got to do. Some individuals just knowing, I mentioned this to Byron this morning's visit, Dr. Branch's son and his wife and family that was visiting with us this morning. And I mentioned to Byron just the impact that his father has had in this congregation, the number of individuals that he's helped. And I know through the years that if someone says they've got a particular disorder, and especially if it's a spinal disorder, and you mention Dr. Branch, there's an immediate, there's somewhat of a, oh, you know someone who can do something, who can help. Now, I know with the degenerative condition of the spine and the nature of that, it's an ongoing process, but there have been some incredible good moments that have been had by him, and the mention of his name, because he's one of the most renowned physicians in all of the Southeast is in regard to spinal surgery. If and I've been in too many situations in waiting rooms and in the pre-op rooms when somebody walks in, oh, you've got Dr. So-and-so. Oh, he's incredible. You know something I've never heard in a pre-op room? I've never heard somebody come in and mention a doctor's name and say, that is the worst guy you could possibly have. I pray God I never hear that, but would that not be awful? Oh, you've got Dr. So-and-so. He just lost people last week. Now, how good would you feel about that procedure? Not too good. In fact, that might be the moment that I think I want a second opinion. You're not going to go into a procedure thinking this guy doesn't know what he's doing. She has no skills whatsoever, and you're turning your life over to that person. But when you have confidence, there's been research shown that your attitude going into the procedure has a great deal to do with the effectiveness of the procedure. Now, the mind is a phenomenal thing. The various biochemical things that occur in the body can make a difference. Well, here's an individual that said, I don't have to. He doesn't have to say anything to me. He doesn't have to touch me. He doesn't even have to know I'm here. If I can just get close enough to touch. Now, that's the thing about it to me. That is because there's a moment that occurs in verse number 29. Immediately, it says. Immediately. The fountain of her blood was dried up. See, there's the difference in what we read about in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and anything that anybody claims today. And I'm not trying to dwell on that. And I'm not trying to say God couldn't still do it today if he so chose to do it. No way am I going to say that. But I am telling you this. That doesn't happen naturally. That was God stepping in and altering what was already taking place in that lady's body. Now, if you want to go through an American Medical Association analysis, at that moment, all of the particular clotting factors come together and just immediately do what was supposed to be done, and whatever organ or whatever part of her body was hemorrhaging, was that immediately? I know what the Bible says is that immediately she was good. Her body was healed of the affliction. Detail not here, but if I compare it to every other healing episode of Jesus, except, now somebody's got to make sure I'm accurate, every healing episode of Jesus was immediate except for the man that he put clay on his eyes, and for some reason there was a pause moment. How do you see? Well, I see men walking like trees. That wasn't the plan. Jesus wanted to give him his sight fully back. Not sure why that in that one particular, but that is as far as I know, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the only episode where Jesus healed somebody that it wasn't instantaneous. When I say instantaneous, she felt as good as she's ever felt in her life. She knew, I am no longer hemorrhaging. In fact, I am whole. I am healed. It was powerful. In fact, it took power to do it, because Jesus, immediately, knowing in himself that power had gone out of him. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? You know, Jesus had to recharge. I started to take a moment, and time's not going to allow it, to look at the number of times where Jesus said, I'm getting away. I'm going somewhere. Most of the time it was the mountains or the lake. I think that's cool. Jesus couldn't keep going 24/7, 365. He was the Son of God, but he was human. And when I say those two things back to back, I still go, I still don't understand all of that. Can't figure it all out. I appreciate all of the things that Paul and Peter try to say after that, and referring back to God and his incarnation, and especially Philippians 2, where Paul kind of tries to give a little indication of he didn't think equality with God was something to be grasped, held onto us, so he emptied himself. I know that some of that was authority and deity, because he was given at his baptism a measure of the Spirit when the Spirit descended on him, and he was able to start and he was doing things far superior to anyone that would ever walk the face of the earth. He had the power of God in a way, and was the manifestation as he spoke. As the writer in Hebrews would say, the only reason the world is still together. Now, various scientists and individuals are making all kinds of looks and trying to figure out, well, is it going to be a meteor that destroys a place? Is the sun going to go nova? I'm going to tell you, none of that's going to be the case. It's going to be whenever Jesus says it happens. You know, some people go, you really believe? That's what the Bible says. Jesus said, let there be light, and spoke everything into existence. And he's going to have to, at some point in the future, when God turns to him and says, it's time, say it's time to destroy the place. The same individual that spoke it into existence is going to come in flaming fire, taking vengeance, and it's going to be burned up. Whole other thought process, whole other lesson. But the power that Jesus has is so phenomenal that even, here's an individual that just touching, it was personal. Verse 30, Jesus immediately knowing of himself that power had gone out of him, turned to him and said, who touched my clothes? And I love, you got to know, if it were me, I figured, it just says in verse number 31, it's the disciples. I bet it's Peter. That's just my guess. As a guess, can't confirm that. I bet it. Peter's going, you've been bumping into people all day long, and you said, who touched you? I mean, there's a part of me with Peter going, Jesus, you're Jesus. You should know who touched you. And he did. His question, who touched me, wasn't Jesus going, I don't know who it was. He did that the same way that when God walked into the garden and he called Adam's name and said, who told you you were naked? He was wanting the woman to understand that he knew what had taken place. You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. Jesus knew who it was. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. I don't know. I wish I'd like to know what she said. I'm gonna take a stab at it. Whatever I've done, I'm sorry. If I wasn't supposed to touch you, but I'm whole. I'm healed. I'll tell the rest of the world that I touched you if that's what needs to take place. Comes, falls at his feet. And here's where Jesus does just what Jesus does. Daughter, your faith. Wait a minute. Wait. And here's one, throw you a little curve. This is that moment in this whole thing where I'm going, most of them would go, you're welcome. Jesus wanted her to know this wasn't just about me. You had a part in this. Jesus said, your faith. Have you missed that before? And you go, women, Jesus healed her. Yeah, I know. And I know there are a lot of different indicators. Some individuals today, I think, have misused. I don't know if this is the passage many times they'll refer to, but individuals who claim healing today, if they can't heal someone, you know one of the first things they say? You don't have enough faith. Or I can show you many more passages other than this one. There was no faith whatsoever involved, and Jesus healed individuals. The Gadarene demoniac had no clue that Jesus was healing him. He didn't know he needed to be healed. He was nuts. Jesus healed him. No faith involved there. What happens here, though, is a demonstration of what happens when you get to the point in your life and there is not a person in this world that can do anything for you. When you have exhausted every effort, every penny that you have, and you finally realize there's only one person that can change this. And if I can just get close enough to him, it'll make a difference. That's where she was. You know, that's not unsimilar to what I see a lot, and I've seen through the years. Until a person gets rock bottom and realizes they need help, they won't look in the right place. And that's true physically, it's true spiritually. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Now that's interesting. Because the moment, says immediately, the bleeding stops, hemorrhaging stops. And he says, be healed. Now he speaks, so there's no doubt that it is a completion of the process. While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, only believe. Now, we're not going to look at the rest of that part of the story. I wanted to focus on the woman. You see, a couple of truths, y'all have been really, Jesus is the only one who can help. You got to get to that point, and that's true. As I said, that's not just true in a physical sense, that's true spiritually. I can give you a real easy answer as to why he doesn't work the same way today that he did then. in my estimation, from biblical truths and principles. It'd be great in some of our minds if Jesus had left the Spirit here in the same form that it was in the first century. As I understand it, it powered down. That's the only time. It's my term. That's not a biblical term. There were individuals after Jesus whom Jesus himself had given the power to, the 12 apostles in Acts 2. Most likely, some people will disagree with me of this. I think the household of Cornelius, I think there's a good possibility that they were able, because it said the same way that it fell on us in Acts 2, fell on them in Acts chapter 10. But after that, the apostles were the only ones who distributed that same power, and they laid hands on individuals and gave them special gifts. Since then, there's been no other need. That's why John 20 ends with, these signs are that you might believe. And then 1 Corinthians 13, real quick thought of this lesson, says that those things are going to cease because they're not going to be needed anymore. And you go, what do you mean not needed anymore? We still got sick people. Do you realize Jesus didn't heal the planet? He could have. Now, I may be overstepping this, but the same man who said, let there be light, the same individual who spoke the world into existence, the same individual who created everything that he created, I think you can say, okay, everybody in the world's healed. I think you could have said that. I think the power drain on that, I don't know. I mean, trying to figure all of that out is way beyond my ability. Healing was never. Because see, the Gadarene demoniac died. The woman with the hemorrhage eventually died. Nature kicked back in. Normal stuff kept happening. The miracles were never so that people could live. The only way we live forever is a spiritual transition. Whether lost in sin or battling difficulty, no matter the scenario, we've got to get to the same place she got to, that when all others have failed, Jesus is there. He's the answer. I think that has helped me understand more than ever what he meant the one moment when he said, which is easier? Take up your bed and walk, or your sins are forgiven. For Jesus, both are equal difficulty. Not difficult for him, impossible for us. So tonight, in this moment with Jesus, what's your need? Are you finally at that place that you've exhausted all the other efforts? And you realize there's only one person that can help me. And if I can just get close enough to him. So we can still reach out and touch. We have his promise of his presence. Matthew 28, when he told the disciples, I will be with you until the end of the age. God, the Father, the Holy Spirit, his presence. We still appeal to him. We still pray. And we have an access to forgiveness through his Son. I haven't talked about it in detail tonight, but most of you have heard that. Because of what Jesus did while he was here, and because of the completion of the process, his death, burial, and resurrection now gives us access to one of the greatest healing moments in all of the world. To be absolutely, totally forgiven of every sin we've ever committed, and to live a life that in any moment when we do fall, we can simply say, Father, forgive me. And 1 John 1 says, if we confess, he is faithful and just to forgive us of all our sins. If we walk in the light of season, he continues to cleanse us, and we have a relationship with each other. How incredibly blessed we are. So tonight, is there something that you need to bring to God? Do you need to come to him for the first time in penitent faith, confession of Jesus as Lord, and biblical a transition from the old man to the new man? And in God's powerful way, as always, the slate's washed clean. We start afresh. We're forgiven, and we've got to forgive ourselves. And that's the blessing. That's because no matter what happens, we will live forever. That was not available until his death, burial, and resurrection. But now the promise is it doesn't matter what you face. It doesn't matter how difficult. It doesn't matter how trying. A 12-year bout with the disease in comparison to eternity. Now, it's easy to say that when you've never had that 12-year disease. I understand that. But the hope that Jesus brings is beyond anything, anywhere in the world. There is no Duke University up in Maryland, over into Texas, all the particular places that contacted us during Caleb's journey and had the answers. They didn't have any answers. They had the answers from a man's perspective. It doesn't matter what the situation is. The only person that has the answer is Jesus. So I hope you trust him that much. And if we can help you come closer to him in any way tonight, would you come as we stand and as we sing?